everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am your host for today, Taylor Rockwell. I am joined on the other end of the line by Henry Bushnell of Yahoo Sports. Henry spent the summer, at least the past month of the summer, covering the U.S. men's national team in the Gold Cup. He was traveling with them. He was going to games. He was in the mix zones, trying to get quotes while writing simultaneously because he's just that good. So Henry is with me today to help me make sense of the Gold Cup final, the Gold Cup as a whole, from the United States men's national team perspective, looking at some players that maybe shone brighter than we thought they would, some that maybe didn't end up shining quite as brightly as we had hoped, but then also getting into some of Greg Berhalter's tactical decisions, some of his substitution decisions in the final specifically, and then what Henry would like to see from the team going forward, both just like from a general perspective as well as with the upcoming Nations League games in mind, some players who he wants to see called in, some maybe new looks he wants for the team. And I'm happy to hear what Henry would like because we really enjoy Henry. I gush a little bit about him or to him on the show, but I should add, Joe, that I really enjoyed his coverage for Yahoo. He does a really good job of kind of combining all of the elements you want to hear about with the team without getting overly focused on maybe details you don't necessarily need to know. So we enjoy Henry. Hopefully you will enjoy this conversation and enjoy reading him in the future. With me now, I've got Henry Bushnell, features writer for Yahoo Sports. Henry, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you for having me, Taylor. It's great to be back.
And thank you for supporting the show, by the way. It sounds like you listened a couple times during the Women's World Cup and the Gold Cup and all that good stuff.
I absolutely did. I'll be honest, I did not listen to every single one of them.
Oh, well, then we're going to hang up, and you're going to go listen to those. We'll be back on. We'll talk about those. That's fine. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
But I certainly listened to a lot of especially the men's national team stuff as I was following them. And yeah, it's great stuff. All the previews, all the post-game stuff. It's often I will listen to post-game shows before I go and write my articles. So.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad we can hopefully be of some use. And thank you for that. Thank you for the work you've been doing. I've been reading your stuff as well, which is why I wanted to talk to you today, because you've been covering the U.S. men's national team throughout the Gold Cup. Now that competition is over, I wanted to talk to you a bit about sort of what happened throughout the Gold Cup and then also what happens going forward. But first, I wanted to kind of, force you into a corner by asking you a very reductive and overly simplistic question, because that's how we roll over here. If you're looking at the U.S. team right now, the U.S. men's national team, I should stress, if you were going with a State of the Union style summary of the team, usually it's, the state of our union is strong, make of that what you will. If you were going to go with the state of the U.S. men's national team right now, how would you categorize it?
I would say more encouraging than a year or two ago.
Okay.
I'd say encouraging, but with a lot of caveats and just acknowledging that we're still in a very nascent stage of what Greg Berhalter is trying to do here, and a lot of the growth I think will be player driven and player dependent.
That's fair. But I also think some of reading your comments or reading your articles, I made the mistake of reading the comments, specifically the one about the Gold Cup final. Obviously mistake, never read the comments. But I was struck
never
by
read Yahoo comments specifically.
True. But I was struck by how angry everyone is about this team, but then how literally every negative response is very certain about what is definitely wrong with this team. And yet they're all very different in their kind of summaries. And that makes me wonder, I'm not breaking any new ground here, I don't think, but I'm wondering where you come in on the idea that, do you think this is the fan base on the men's side is the most polarized it's been in a while, or do you think maybe after the failure to qualify is when we saw the most sort of frustration and vitriol?
That's a really interesting question, because I think obviously a lot of the frustration now stems from the failure to qualify. But I think maybe it is more polarized just because there was widespread frustration after Cuba, of course. And there are some people who are after that and since then have not budged at all and are burn everything down, everything is terrible. Whereas other people have gradually come back to kind of the more encouraged state and hopeful and cautiously optimistic. So maybe it is more polarized than it has been in the recent past.
So going in depth on some of the complaints though for a moment. Again, don't read the comments, but one of the one kind of consistent name in there that seems to frustrate people more than anything else is Michael Bradley. Again, not anything new, but like I wanted to start there because we hear a lot about how he's very slow, about how he's a defensive liability, even people frustrated with some of his passing range. Daryl and I are still very much inclined to think that he's a key part of this team now and going forward, and should be, because of sort of all of the different things he's asked to do and how many times he does all of them well at the same time. So that's kind of our perspective. I'm wondering where you are on Michael Bradley.
Yeah, he's interesting because he has like one or two skills that nobody else in the national team pool has, I think. Specifically just like his range of passing and the long balls, and like you saw him several times hit that crossfield ball to the overlapping right back, or just the high right back. That's a ball that, I mean, other players can play it, but nobody can play it as consistently and as accurately as him. And just like the threat of that specific play where you receive the ball from the left or on a layoff, open your body up and just ping that crossfield ball. Like that's important to, I think, to the way the U.S. wants to play and the way they want to be able to hurt teams going forward. But to play Michael Bradley, you also need to offer him sufficient protection because, as you guys and everybody else has talked about, he doesn't have the legs that he did 5 years ago, and he won't have more legs in 2 years than he does now. There were times you could argue, maybe specifically in the final, that the U.S. system didn't protect him enough. But that said, like there are ball winners and athletes in this player pool that you can put around him to still make him an effective national team player. So, there's nobody. I mean, I think Tyler Adams' skill set is more different than Bradley's than people realize. And I understand that he could play in that role. But I also think there's something to be said for trying to put Adams and McKennie on the field with Bradley to kind of cover up some of Bradley's weaknesses, but still bring out his strengths, which are, as you said, I think are still key to this team.
So with that in mind, then, do you think the only way that happens is for Tyler Adams to go back to the kind of hybrid right back central midfield role? Do you think there's a chance we see him played centrally and like Christian Pulisic puts out wide? If you're Greg Berhalter and you want to keep Michael Bradley in there, how would you incorporate Tyler Adams into your starting 11?
That's the thing. I think it has to, and I know a lot of people don't want to see him in that right back role, but I think you have to at least, like what we saw it for 90 minutes, right? Yep. In the friendly against Ecuador. Like, I think so. I think we have to at least at some point, maybe you don't go to it right in August or September, whenever the friendlies are, but I think you have to give it another try at some point to see if, I mean, the big question with that role is, against different types of opponents, how often does he actually end up in midfield, and how much do his midfield skills come out? And so I think you have to try it and see if it works. Like we've got plenty of time to kind of pilot that. I think you have to go back to it at some point just to see, because it is. I do think that's the way that you can get him on the field with McKennie and Bradley. I don't think you want to play Bradley as a 6 and McKennie and Adams ahead of him. I'm not really sure that would be the ideal balance.
That makes sense to me. But then I think if we're gonna I'm gonna force you into being Greg Berhalter basically for a little while here, because So say we're in we have one of the kind of international breaks where we have two friendlies. Michael Bradley plays that number 6 role in the first game. If you're sort of sitting Bradley and bringing in another central midfielder, I'll put it this way. What would you like to see, or what do you think Berhalter might do in this case of do you think that's just going to be Will Trapp deputizing there for the foreseeable future and then Tyler Adams playing that right back role or elsewhere? Or do you think if maybe Bradley is sitting for that second theoretical friendly, do you think maybe we see Tyler Adams get some game time there?
That's interesting. Yeah, I think in the September friendlies, if I were Greg Berhalter, I'd play Tyler Adams once as a right back, once as a defensive midfielder, and when he plays as a right back, put Bradley in there, and then take Bradley out and put Tyler Adams in that 6th spot for the other one. I think that's probably what I do. And honestly, we can use these Nations League games as kind of experimental games as well. I think I don't think. First of all, I don't think winning it would be nice to win the Nations League, but winning it isn't a huge deal, and also. the U.S. should not have much trouble winning a group of Canada and Cuba. I think those are the two.
You are correct.
Okay, good. So yeah, I don't know. I think like throughout the fall, and especially as they integrate new players, new players that you and other people probably know more about than I do. Like the other options will begin to evolve and other combinations. So we'll see how it goes. But I want to see Adams tried in both spots.
What did you make going back to the Gold Cup final, or like I guess the final moments of the Gold Cup final? What did you make of the difference between the post-match opinions of Berhalter and his players? Because Berhalter indicated he thought the United States were too direct in the second half. Arriola and Long felt like the team wasn't direct enough. It didn't sound like they were necessarily like rebuking what Greg Berhalter was saying. It just sounded like more so there was a little bit of confusion about what the plan was. So what did you make of that sort of disparity?
Yeah, it's really interesting trying to just like figure out both from what players and Berhalter said and just rewatching it and hearing other opinions. Like it's interesting trying to figure out what exactly went wrong in that second half. And I don't know that I have a perfect answer to it. But so it is interesting. Like everybody agrees and realizes that they played more direct in the first half than they had all tournament, which makes sense. You're playing the best opponent that you had all tournament, and for the most part it worked. But then towards the end of the first half, it started not working. And like Mexico center back started beating Jozy Altidore in one-on-one duels when they did play direct. And the ball, and when that happens, when you give up possession so quickly, the ball just keeps coming down your throat and comes back down your throat. And that's why I think Berhalter, so the players felt that they could have continued playing direct because that's how they created their best chances in the first half. But I think Berhalter also sensed toward the end of the half that they were kind of losing that edge, and they were starting to lose the individual duels. And so he wanted more control. He wanted them to try to keep possession. But they just couldn't play out of the back. So at some point, like neither strategy was working. Mm-hmm. The direct balls weren't working. The playing out of the back wasn't working. So they just did. That's how they lost control of the game. And I think it is. Like so there are reasonable, rational points on both sides of like how they should have fixed it, but it also just like comes down to executing either strategy well. And so I didn't, as you said, like I don't think the two sides were rebuking each other. It's more so just like when the U.S. started to lose control of the game, and when Mexico started to dominate them, the players like. Their minds immediately went to what had worked, both in that game and in the past. Like they've had success over the years. Altidore, Paul Arriola, guys like that. They've had success against CONCACAF foes, against Mexico, playing direct and hurting them more so on the break. So it's kind of just like they reverted to thinking that was the solution, whereas Berhalter wanted that control. And neither is necessarily would have been a correct way to go about fixing it. But it was interesting to just see the players I think it's just like their natural tendencies that they would go back to playing direct when things aren't going well.
So you mentioned natural tendencies with that kind of inclination. My question then is, but when sort of they're thinking, oh, this was working, now we're kind of getting under more pressure, we're not able to play out of the back, let's just kick it long, whereas Berhalter's seeing it as like, no, we want to kind of test ourselves, change it up and see if we can adapt to what Mexico's throwing at us. Do you think the players, not necessarily lack of willingness to do that because they obviously tried, but do you think the kind of hesitation there, the kind of reverting to their natural instincts is more of a sign of a lack of understanding of what Berhalter's asking, a lack of maybe belief in how it works, or just a lack of overall sort of, I guess, preparation for how to change the game plan mid-game?
I don't think it's a lack of understanding. Mm-hmm. I really just think that it was the first time for a lot of those players being in an atmosphere like that. Like it was a really good atmosphere at Soldier Field on Sunday night, and a lot of Mexican fans. And when Mexico starts growing into the game and getting the better of the game, like that stadium just gets loud, and like there are tough tackles flying in, and just the pressure of that moment. I think in that moment when you get uncomfortable, when you get in a situation that you're unfamiliar with, you kind of just want to revert to those familiar tendencies. So I think it's almost just like a natural instinct thing that those players don't have enough experience overcoming and sticking to what the coach wants. So So I don't think, because as I said, like it's the first time. So I don't think it's like a long-term worry or anything. But it is interesting, and it will be something to watch like the next time they get in a pressure pack situation like that against a team that is as good or better than them.
Much more still to come from my chat with Henry Bushnell of Yahoo Sports, but first I wanted to let you know that today's sponsor is Policy Genius. Part of adulthood is having to do things that you don't really want to do, like red-eye flights, working late, visiting in-laws, and getting life insurance. I feel like I'm going to be doing most of those things in the next week or so. But another part of adulthood is learning to delegate what you hate. And while you can't delegate a visit to the in-laws, no, you cannot, you can definitely delegate life insurance shopping. And that's where Policy Genius comes in. Policy Genius is the easy way to shop for life insurance online. In just 2 minutes, you can compare quotes from top insurers to find your best price. Once you apply, the Policy Genius team will handle all the paperwork and red tape, which means no sales pressure, no hidden fees, just financial protection and peace of mind. The no sales pressure and hidden fees is really nice because I'm currently recording this around lunchtime on Thursday afternoon, and I'm debating where I want to order lunch from so that I have to interact with people the least amount. I don't have to get upsold or asked about additional items. So these are things that concern me because that's who I am. So Policy Genius won't do that to you. So if you need life insurance but you just don't want to deal with all the legwork, head to policygenius.com. If you're like me and you hesitate to order from restaurants because it could be too emotionally taxing, then you should probably head to Policy Genius if you're looking for life insurance. It's the easy way to compare top insurers and find the best value. Policy Genius, delegate what you hate, especially if you hate getting life insurance. So thank you to Policy Genius for sponsoring today's episode. Now back to my conversation with Henry. So I like the idea of Christian Pulisic's best role on the team being whatever he makes it. I think that was, I can't remember if that was your point or if that was a Berhalter point that you were summarizing. But it sounds like within the sort of U.S. adapting, playing on instinct, it sounds like maybe you're now sold on the idea of him playing centrally for the United States.
Yeah. I mean, I was very much in the wide camp for a while, as recently as before going into this tournament. But just to see how often from that central position they're able to get him on the ball in wide areas, which is the reason you play him wide, is to get him isolated against fullbacks. And he was still, especially against lesser teams, he was able to do that plenty. And there are 2 or 3 defined patterns of movement between him and Paul Arriola, whether it's Arriola checking to the ball and Pulisic kind of running towards the corner flag, or if it's just them drifting and switching places while the ball is at the back. I think the U.S. was able to get him on in those positions with the ball enough that playing him central works because it brings out his winger qualities and it also brings out what he can bring as a central playmaker that nobody else in the player pool can bring. And I think that's the key point. If a number 10 emerged that was close to Pulisic's level, then yes, you put him wide and you put the if you want to say more natural central playmaker in there. But right now Pulisic is easily the best central playmaker on the team. So I think it's worth having him there as long as his winger qualities can also affect the game.
But it seems for the rest of the team, the players have individual responsibilities of where they need to be and when. Paul Arriola talked about how it's basically I think he told Christian Pulisic you do what you do and I'll kind of adjust to what you're doing. So if you go wide, I'll go central. If you stay central, I'll go wide. I'm wondering, from what you've observed, how much responsibility do you think Christian Pulisic has to the system versus how much of it is sort of you kind of do what you want to do, we'll build around you?
That's interesting. I think it's definitely some of both. That Arriola quote was interesting. He gave it to me after the Trinidad game, I think. And I'm honestly not completely sure how 100% accurate it is. I'm sure there are some times where it's kind of defined when Pulisic will make certain runs and kind of pre-scripted. Because there's Weston McKennie said something interesting after the semifinal. It's the whole point of what they're trying to do is have enough unpredictable movements within have movements within their offensive system that are unpredictable to opponents but predictable to themselves.
Yeah.
And so that's a big question going forward. Just how comfortable can they get? How predictable can those movements get to themselves without being unpredictable to opponents? And I think that's really goes to what Pulisic's role is, because he has to there has to be some structure there, right? And I think it'll change based on the opponent. Like against Mexico, for example, especially when you're playing without the ball more, there has to be more definition in Pulisic's role, and he has to have more responsibility to the shape and structure of the team. Whereas against a team like Guyana, I think you just tell him to do whatever he wants and trust that the way he drives the offense and the way he makes the opponent react and the way he makes his teammates react that's like one of the best ways to break down a lesser opponent. So to answer your question in a roundabout way, I think it really will depend on the opponent.
On the topic of the opponent, specifically stronger opponents and his kind of role in the defensive shape and structure, we were really confused with the moment when Roldan subs on in the Gold Cup final, because he clearly runs on. To our eyes, he does the 4-5-1. Like, he makes it clear 5-man midfield.
Yep.
2 minutes later, they're back in the 4-4-2. That's when Zardes subs in. I'm not trying to throw Daryl under the bus, but it was his idea. So Daryl speculated that he felt like this might have been because Pulisic just sort of maybe was supposed to stay a bit more central, a bit more in midfield, and pushed forward, and then essentially kind of broke the 5-man midfield. So they went back to a 4-4-2. I wasn't quite as convinced by that argument until I saw that line from Berhalter about how Christian is a player who plays on intuition a lot, and a lot of his game is rooted in intuition. And I'm wondering, do you think well, first of all, I'm wondering what you made of that kind of 2-minute chunk and what may have happened there. But the second one being, do you think he has that positional discipline to play defense in a Berhalter system versus maybe just having that more kind of free-floating role and providing the pressure that maybe he enjoys a bit more?
Yeah, to answer your question, I have no idea what happened in that 2-minute stretch. Yeah, I'm right with you guys. And it's something that I didn't really, watching the game live, it's sometimes it's tough to recognize as much stuff on TV. So I didn't even recognize that in real time.
We just saw him 5-man midfield, and then suddenly it was it's a 4-4-2 again. That's weird.
Right. Because it's interesting because the 5-man midfield would have made sense, or at least a more normal 4-4-2 with Christian Roldan not playing as high as Jordan Morris had been without the ball. So I didn't really, but to answer your question, I think, and we can get to finer points of the defensive shape, I'm assuming. But one of the adjustments in a game against a team like Mexico, when your legs are tired and they're having a lot of the ball, and maybe you want to just slow the game down and short midfield a bit, has to be one of those front two kind of dropping on, or maybe dropping on a defensive midfielder, or at least being a bit more conservative and making sure they cut off passing lanes to those midfielders, so it's not so easy for a team like Mexico to play through the U.S. And neither Altidore nor Pulisic, and then Zardes really did that. And yeah, Pulisic is probably the person you'd want to do it, and he does have to. I mean, he has said openly that he doesn't enjoy the defensive side of the game very much, but obviously he does it, and he's committed to the team. But he's going to have to improve there against better teams, as you said, if he's going to play this central role against a team like Mexico, or against even better teams that we might play in friendlies of the World Cup.
All right. Well, since Pulisic doesn't want to play defense, let's focus on defense ourselves then, so he doesn't have to. Okay. Because there was I don't think we disagree necessarily about the defensive shape the United States were trying to do. I think it was more about the effectiveness of it, or specifically why it didn't seem to be working, especially in the second half. I think our contention was that they were trying to be in a 4-4-2, but that it didn't really work, that they kept kind of spreading out, and so there were passing options through Pulisic and Jozy Altidore when they were deployed further forward. Same thing when Zardes comes in. There's still lots of spacing. So we were kind of critical of the 4-4-2. You weren't necessarily not critical of it. I think your argument was just sort of that they weren't necessarily playing a 4-4-2. Is that fair to say? Yeah,
so basically, one of the things that they did all game was, and I think it was so they've had their wingers press higher in certain games, but the interesting wrinkle in this game specifically was that, so it was the 4-4-2, but then when Edson Alvarez, Mexico's defensive midfielder, would drop back in between the center backs, Altidore was the right of the front two. He was on Hector Moreno, Mexico's left-sided center back. When Edson Alvarez would drop in, the U.S. would kind of rotate more into almost something similar to their attacking shape. So Altidore would come shift to the left and go on Alvarez. Jordan Morris would step up on Hector Moreno, the left center back. And Reggie Cannon would come bombing all the way up to the wing to the left back, and then Miazga would take the left winger. It's kind of this weird rotation. And they did it all game, like even when Christian Roldan came on. So it wasn't like, I mean, it was, I guess it was a base 4-4-2, but depending on what shape Mexico was in, they adjusted. So like my thing was like, I think like my thing was that just saying the 4-4-2 is the problem is like a bit oversimplistic and reductive. What the issue was, like, I would have so I think everybody agrees that they kind of got overrun in midfield in the second half, whether that was Mexico throwing extra numbers in there or just like leaving Bradley and McKennie 2v2 versus Guardado and Dos Santos, and like they started losing individual battles, which is going to happen against a team like Mexico. There are various ways to combat that. One of which would have been to have Roldan kind of just like play as a stay-at-home right midfielder. When the ball is on the weak side, you tuck inside, and same for Areola on the other side. That's just a way to get an extra number in midfield, kind of just like those rotations across that midfield line of four. Or as I said earlier, like telling Pulisic, like make sure that if you're going to press the center backs, you have to cut off a passing angle to somebody. Like the angles of the front two's defensive runs like had to be a lot better. So something like that had to happen. So I'm just saying, I don't think the 4-4-2 inherently was the problem. Is just that they kind of kept doing it. And I mean, I thought it was really weird to have Roldan continuing to play so high. And I think you guys might have mentioned this, like that's the system that they were running, where Roldan was continually rushing out to Hector Moreno, and where Reggie Cannon was consistently going all the way up the right. Like eventually that's going to tire players down, and just these back and forth runs. And when you're doing that for most of this, when you don't have much of the ball in the second half, I really just didn't understand why they continued to do that, and why when Mexico kind of got hold of the game, they didn't just like more sit back and try to challenge Mexico to beat them. They continued to press them, and I think that was part of the problem, why they look so thin in midfield.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said, and I would add that, like, yeah, if they had just kind of sat back in a deep-lying 4-4-2, looked to maybe counter through Christian Pulisic, I think that would have been fine. What I was frustrated about, and kind of continue to be concerned about, is that everything you've mentioned is correct, and I also don't know if there's like an effective solution, because I'm sure you could argue that, well, you know, like more repetition, more rotation, guys will get this, like, you know, Pulisic will learn to cut off that option, or Jozy blocks off that option. Now they're confined to one side of the field, and then we step. But the reason why I felt sort of like, this doesn't really matter, but like the reason why I sort of felt comfortable saying they were defending in a 4-4-2 is because that one like wide player stepping seemed so late. Like, you're right. Like, it would be like Roldan would go forward, and then Reggie Cannon would have to go, and then a center back slides over. And it always felt very reactive. It was like, if they go to this guy, then we'll all step. But if they go to this guy, well, then we'll all step. And I don't know how that ever gets faster. And so it just feels like it's always sort of being very reactionary. And then, I worry that then your guys get tired. You leave people exposed in the midfield. Michael Bradley can't cover that distance. And those are the kind of areas where I felt like there weren't as many answers. It wasn't as like clear cut of a, here's the problem, we'll solve it, and we'll move forward sort of situation. Right.
Yeah, no, that's completely fair. And I mean, it was interesting, like, because I thought I didn't think there was a problem with the 4-4-2 in general, but then I saw, like, I know you guys were concerned by it, and a lot of other people, like, whose opinion I respect, like I know Matt Doyle has written that he's very concerned by it. So I was kind of like checking myself, but I think my point is that, like, it's the adjustments within the 4-4-2 that were the problem, and like the specific way that they defended Mexico. Like, yes, it definitely was a base 4-4-2, but it's never like, you're never just gonna sit in a 4-4. If you're the U.S., you're probably not just gonna sit in a 4-4-2 low block, especially against some of these CONCACAF teams. So it's how they go about their pressing, and the timing of everything, and the different. So, like, I mean, yeah, like they were. It was like, how much is it man-to-man? How much is it zone? How much is, say, like Bradley leaving a deep midfielder to go over and, you know, slide over and like cut off a passing lane into the striker's feet? And there are various rotations within it that, like, I don't think the 4-4-2 in and of itself is a problem, and I don't think they need to come out in September with like a completely new defensive shape.
I do think they need to work on that defensive shape, though.
Yeah,
because
no, that's fair. Yeah.
But I've been thinking a lot about what Berhalter said about subbing on Christian Roldan, because, again, we were very confused as to like him almost being a right winger at times. That felt like a role that Tyler Boyd could have done pretty well. Then we were even more confused when he talked about how basically he made the decision to bring on Christian Roldan because he needed numbers more centrally, even though Roldan was on the right wing pretty much the entire time from what I saw. And it made me wonder, this is like a little bit abstract, I think, but like, is this an example, do you think, of like Berhalter's system causing his game management headaches? Because I just wonder if like the wide players are supposed to step into that attack to help with the press, but he brings Roldan in to be another midfielder, but now he has to be almost like a central midfielder who's on the right side, but also gets forward. And I just wonder if like this is where we see sort of maybe the kinks not quite necessarily being ironed out of what Berhalter wants to do.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you put it well. And I think he got a bit too cute with the substitutions, and he decided to, my understanding was that one of the reasons so I think really the only reason you would bring Christian Roldan into a game like that is to just play as a defensive right-sided midfielder who's just going to run around a lot and break a play. It seemed like he almost wanted him in there as like an extra guy who could control the ball and like for possession reasons, which obviously yes, he can do better than Jordan Morris, but also like I would not, if Christian Roldan is the guy who you're going to try to bring on to help get more possession against Mexico, like I don't feel comfortable with Christian Roldan on the ball against Mexico. Like I don't think he's at that level. I don't think that's the player you want. So part of it speaks to a lack of options. Like I understand why he would have wanted a player like that instead of a player like Tyler Boyd. But I mean, Tyler Boyd's a better player than Christian Roldan. I think we all agree with that. And like same with like bringing Daniel Levitz on at the end. Like I get it. I understood the reasoning, but also like why not just like sometimes at the end of games you just gotta throw on like your best attacking player and hope that in a disorganized, kind of scrambled last few minutes, you just want the more talented, more threatening attacking player on there. So yeah, I do think same with I guess Altidore was looking tired, but you don't take Jozy Altidore out in the 64th minute of a tie game against Mexico. I did have problems with the subs.
Hey everybody, Taylor jumping in one more time with a PSA of sorts. We've just had the July 4th holiday, or about a week ago, and it's a good reminder about belts. And that's why I want to talk about today's sponsor, Grip 6 Belts. Because 4th of July parties, you've got the barbecues, you've got the cookouts. It seems to be the kind of national holiday in which dads the world over, the nation over at least, tuck the shirt into the khaki shorts, exposing usually the belt from like 15 years ago. There was one that was doing the rounds of the, I forget what politician it was, but he had the braided belt. You never want that look. Braided belt's not the way to go. Instead, you should go the route of the Grip 6 belt. It's the only belt with no holes, no belt flap hanging out, but if you're using it, it's adjustable, so once it locks in place, it will hold all day. But say you're at a barbecue, you overeat, maybe you can just loosen it a little bit. You don't have to go to the next hole. You don't have to feel the shame of like having to like drop down one hole notch. Instead, it's just a little adjustment and you're fine, and then it locks in place all day using their patent-pending technology. Grip 6 belts are consistently rated 4.5 out of 5 stars by customers on Amazon. They've got over 900 reviews, 600 Facebook reviews as well. So lots of people enjoying Grip 6 belts, and they should be, because the buckle is aircraft-grade aluminum, bright dip anodized. The strap is durable nylon webbing with breaking strength of 2,700 pounds. That's a lot of weight. And I should add, even though I began this by talking to the dads of the nation, Grip 6 belts are made for men and women. They have men's sizes, women's sizes, sizes for kids. Everyone is welcome over at Grip 6 Belts. And they're welcome to use the TSS discount code to get some percentages off. If you use TSS at grip6.com/TSS, that's GRIP, the number 6.com/TSS, you can get 33% off the classic pack, 20% off a standard belt. So 20% off one belt, 33% off for the classic pack. So check them out. Don't wear the braided belts. Don't embarrass your whole family by wearing a belt that you bought like in the 70s when it was the style to wear. Although maybe it's come back around then. I feel like the 80s have come back around as well. So don't wear one from the 60s. Then I think you're definitely out of style. So there's that. But thank you very much to Grip 6 for sponsoring today's show and for providing modern belts for the modern consumer. Let's stick with Altidore for a moment, because Daryl and I operated under the assumptions this tournament, like two assumptions. One was that Jozy Altidore was Greg Berhalter's like number one striker by a distance. Number two, that he wasn't playing basically due to injury, maybe a lack of overall fitness. Instead, it seems like there's a chance that he was good to go the whole time. Even Altidore seemed confused by his lack of minutes, right? He said, like, after the match that, like, I don't know why I wasn't played more.
Yeah.
What do you make of that situation? Because that seems slightly more worrying than a lot of the other stuff we've talked about if there's a little bit of disconnect between the player and the coach as to why the player wasn't playing.
Yeah, I honestly am not completely sure what to make of it. Yeah, I mean, it was, so Jozy, I think I might have written this, but like he didn't talk to print, online, written media for the entire tournament until after the final. Which, by the way, I have no problem with. Like, players can do whatever they want. But yeah, so he came over and talked to us for the first time. Jozy's very media savvy, and I'm sure if he decided to talk, like he knew he was gonna kind of just get asked about his fitness and stuff like that. He said he was fine. Like, I asked him straight up, like, what went into the way, like, your playing time and what went into the way your minutes were. Because I think we all assumed that it was it was load management or minutes management, and that they were kind of building him up to play a key role in the semifinal and final, which I guess kind of ended up being what it was. Like, he obviously started the semifinal and the final. But Jozy, before I even finished the question, was just like, I don't know. Which was again, like, slightly concerning, but also, like, it would be understandable that he would be frustrated, given that he just didn't get that much playing time. And when he did start in the two key games, he got 50 something minutes and a little over 60 minutes in the final. So I think, like, the big fault is I would assume that it was kind of managing his minutes and not wanting him to play 5 or 6 games over a 3-week period or whatever, given the injury troubles he's had in the past. But to not build him up to the point of match fitness where he can go longer than 60 minutes without looking leggy, like, I think that was a fault of Berhalter. And the fact that he, like, I understood taking him out in the semifinal and kind of just, like, resting him up for the final. But maybe rather than taking him off after 50, like, you almost just use that as like a training, like, match fitness exercise for him. Play him 70 minutes in that semifinal, so that he's. I mean, it was a somewhat short turnaround, but I mean, 3 days of rest should have been plenty for him to then be ready to go for Sunday in the final. So I think Berhalter's big failure was not getting him to a point where he could have played. Like, the whole system was designed to get him to a point where he could play as much as possible in the final, and Berhalter didn't do that. So I think in the end, like, he didn't get it right. But I would assume that Altidore is the number one striker going forward. I don't think that he was playing Jozy ahead of him solely because he thinks Jozy's better.
Since this is an audio podcast, I will inform the listeners that I was nodding that whole time, just so they know. I have a Henry Bushnell question at this point, though. Did you say that, so did you get about, like, 2/3 of the way through the question about why he didn't play more before he said, I don't know?
No, it was basically at the end of it.
Oh, okay.
He was, but he said it, like, very quickly, and, like, it's clear he didn't want to say anything else. And then I think it was Jeff Carlisle asked him a follow-up about whether he was, like, whether he felt good and healthy, and he said, yeah, like, feel good, feel fine.
Okay. I always struggle with those moments where, like, the player clearly didn't enjoy the question you asked or didn't really want to talk about it, and how you're like, so you hated that question, let's talk about something else. Like, I always wonder how you redirect. Instead, I guess the answer is just have Jeff Carlisle standing next to you.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And
perfect.
Yeah, and it wasn't like I don't think he was annoyed by the question. Like, I think he probably knew how he was going to respond to it, and he was good. Like, he wasn't. A lot of players were pretty, understandably, down after the final, like, with pretty glum looks on their faces. And they all handle it in different ways. Some players are pretty brief. Other players, like, we talked to Reggie Cannon after the game, for example, and he was, like, spoke very, like, passionately about how much work they had put in, and just, like, kind of like the emotion from the game turning into, like, him being able to articulate the emotions of the past the past month. Like, this is the guy who didn't even think he was going to be on the roster, and all of a sudden he's starting a final. And then Jozy, like, obviously he's been in situations like this before. He was very like analytical, talking about the game intelligently, and like what went wrong, what they could have done better, and various aspects of it. So that was interesting to see.
We talked to Tyler Boyd very briefly a little while ago. I wanted to go back to him for a moment because we were sort of excited to see him maybe get thrown in there just to try stuff. That seemed like what kind of he's all about. Have you heard any updates about maybe what has happened to Tyler Boyd? I think there were rumblings that maybe he was carrying a hamstring injury. I think Matt Doyle may have tweeted about that or talked about that, but I don't think I've seen anything official, so I'm wondering if you've heard anything about Mr. Boyd.
Yeah, I was told there was not an injury,
Okay.
but that said, I'm not like reporting that as fact that there was an injury because, I know he's working on his club situation right now. So if that's the case, people would probably want to say that he has no injury. There are no worries or anything. But I do think, wasn't it, I went back and watched the Fox broadcast, and I'm pretty sure that they said he was a possibility coming off the bench in the second half.
I thought so.
I think I'm pretty sure he was available. And again, like, I guess it makes sense. Like, you wanted guys for specific roles. I guess it makes sense why he didn't play. And by the way, I completely understand why he didn't start. Like, I do think Jordan Mars was a better fit for that game, even if he's not necessarily a better player in a vacuum. But no, yeah, I would have loved to see Tyler Boyd off the bench. And I think that's if he was indeed healthy and available, like, I think that's a mistake that Berhalter made.
All right. So then moving on to like the upcoming friendlies, the Nations League games that we've got like late summer this fall. What would you like to see from that team? Let's start with this. Were there any players you think that were included on this Gold Cup squad that maybe we won't see included on the next one? Or is there anybody who you think like decidedly played themselves out of contention? Or do you think pretty much the whole squad is still safe for potential selection next time around?
I think they're all in play, but I think we'd all agree that there are a lot of players that like come the Hex, which is what starts earlier than we thought it was going to start. That just like probably won't play a factor, or if everything goes right and if players develop properly, hopefully we won't need to be a factor. Like, I mean, there are some players like Georgi Mihailovic is young and is still growing, but at the moment he's just like not national team caliber, I wouldn't say. And there are several players like that, like even like Will Trapp, like great guy, perfect, like good locker room guy, above average MLS player, very, very serviceable, very solid. But if Will Trapp's playing in a World Cup qualifier, like I think that's a problem. And there are like I think maybe even Christian. I mean, maybe saying Christian Roldan fits into that is a bit harsh on him. Omar Gonzalez should not play a part in World Cup qualifiers. I think there are several guys like this was a pretty thin group. Really after the starting group, there weren't many options off the bench, which again was one of the problems. Like Jonathan Lewis, I don't think is really national team caliber quite yet. So there's a group of like six, like Daniel Lovitz, like they're a group of 6 or 7 guys like that who are many of them MLS players who are perfectly fine MLS players, but probably we just don't need to see much more of yet with the national team, and it would be better to give whether it's younger players or European guys that Berhalter hasn't seen as much of as MLS guys. I think hopefully we'll see not a completely different roster, but a somewhat different roster in the fall.
I'm glad you make the point about depth, because that's one that I've been trying to figure out why there was a large narrative that this is almost Mexico's B team, or they're missing a lot of their kind of star players. And if they had them, I didn't really think it necessarily was their weakest team we've ever seen them play in a Gold Cup. Certainly when they're playing Copa America, they play weaker teams in the past. But I also felt like we heard this is their B team, and they're playing against the USA's A team, and they still can't even win. And I had an issue with that, and I couldn't quite tell why, aside from that there were players like Tyler Adams, like John Brooks, missing. And I think it's the depth thing that really, maybe that starting 11 is you swap out a few people, and it is a pretty strong team, or is close to an A team. But then you look at kind of the players coming off the bench, and I think not having, say, DeAndre Yedlin or Dwayne Holmes or some of the other players that maybe we'll see, even Josh Sargent, we'll see once they kind of get a little bit more fitness or they get a little bit more form that we see in there. And I think that makes the team a much stronger selection. So yeah, I take your point about the kind of lack of depth and how hopefully that's something we see change with the Nations League games. So thanks for that.
Right.
Well done, Henry.
Right. Yeah, and it was like Mexico. I mean, I'd say it was a A- B+ team, and the U.S. was a A- team. But the thing with Mexico, as you said, is like Mexico loses Chucky Lozano and Carlos Vela, their two starting wingers, and they've got Rodolfo Pizarro to just stick in there, who's excellent.
Yeah.
And the U.S. loses Tyler Adams, and it's like, who is there? You play, Nick Lima's Nick Lima's fine, he's serviceable, but he's a right back, and it completely changes how you play. Or you lose something in midfield, depending on where Adams is playing. So it's just, the drop off from, like, the U.S. had roughly 13, 14 players you could count on in a final. Mexico has like 20 players.
Yeah. So then I think you did this in one of your articles, but I'm going to make you do it on the show now. So if we're looking at like your ideal Berhalter influenced starting 11 right now, I'm assuming you've got Zach Steffen in goal. Does that mean you've got Tyler Adams at the kind of hybrid right back?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time thinking about this. Like, I think it's 50. I was almost going to put two different lineups in my article. Like, one is if Adams is playing right back, one is if he's playing defensive midfield. But yeah, I decided, because I think it allows you to get other players. Because of the way it allowed me to get other players on the field, I put Adams at right back. Yeah.
Okay, and then center backs, is it Long and Brooks? If Brooks is ever healthy, is it Long and Brooks right now for you?
Yeah, I think like Long might even be the most assured starter at this point.
Yeah.
And then I think Brooks is still the most talented center back in the U.S. player pool. But yeah, so it's those two, and I guess if one of them is injured, it's probably Miazga slightly over Zimmerman, just because it's based on the fact that he played the last two games. But I think those two are pretty neck and neck.
And then I'm guessing that would make it, if we stick with the Adams moving centrally as right back, then the left back is going to be Tim Ream for you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And my concern in our review show was, like, what happens then if teams adjust to what the United States was doing by, like, when they sent Reggie Cannon, like, really far forward, the idea there was it brings Pizarro back. They switch Pizarro to the other side where Tim Ream is never going to get as far forward, and now they can kind of have a little bit more free reign. If the United States wants to switch it up, how do you think they could go about sort of getting a more attacking left back on, but not having to change their overall game plan? Is it just the case of, like, put on a more attacking left back, but then put on a more standard right back to stay home?
Yeah, so I mean that's one, and I think that's one of my takeaways just from the tournament as a whole, is that yes, I think like this specific way that they're playing with the right back high and the left back staying at home, I think that's just an adaptation based on the personnel. And if the U.S.'s best left back or best option at left back was a more traditional up and down left back, like say Anthony Robinson at this time next year has developed into one of the best left backs in the championship or something, then maybe he's that guy there. And then you can play then what we would probably see, if we still have a right back who's bombing up and down the right wing as well, then what we'll see, what you saw in the Panama game was, I think in possession, the central midfielder, the defensive midfielder would drop back in between the center backs in possession. So it's just about getting to that, 3-2-4-1 or 3-2-2-3, whatever you want to call it, that attacking shape. And there are different ways that Berhalter can get to it, and that the team can get to it based on what personnel they have. So yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. Like, how much do they change when Tim Ream is no longer the left back, because he's a pretty, he's a somewhat unique skill set for a left back, just because he's more so a center back. But I don't think they'll have it. I don't think it'll be a huge adjustment. I mean, it'll change the way they play, but it won't be like an unworkable adjustment when they have to throw somebody else in there.
All right. And then like with your ideal 11 again, I'm pretty sure I can do most of it except for one spot, because I'm guessing you've got Areola left, Bradley as the number 6, McKennie and Pulisic as your other midfielders, with Jozy Altidore ahead. Does that all check out?
Yeah.
So then right side, that right wing, who do you want to see there going forward in an ideal world?
So there is no ideal world. That's the thing. Yeah. Like I don't think there's
good point.
I don't think there's an ideal person for this position right now. Mm-hmm. But if we're playing Adams at right back and he's inverting, that means the winger is just staying very wide. Like, they're not coming in field and checking to the ball and stuff. So I'd put DeAndre Yedlin there. Like, I like Yedlin more than most. I think he's still a very good player, and even if he's not a winger, like his elite skills, which are just his pace and direct running, they work in that role if the right winger's role is just to stay on the touchline and offer high width there. So I'd play him there, but then like if we're putting Adams in midfield and playing a more up and down right back like a Reggie Cannon or somebody, or if we're playing Yedlin at right back, for example, then I honestly don't have I guess it would be Tyler Boyd if he's healthy, but I don't feel strongly about that. Like I think him and Jordan Morris are, I guess, somewhat level, and Tim Weah would probably be in that picture as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know.
All right. Well, that's one we'll keep an eye on. I'm sure you'll keep an eye on as well. But you are transitioning away from soccer for the time being. Is that correct? We've got you before you go full basketball.
Yeah, basketball, American football. Back to the. But I'm definitely not going away from soccer for good. And the next time the national team is relevant, I will be back to soccer, I think. But yes, I'm going back to the feature writing, jumping around to various different sports.
I look forward to the men's national team being relevant again. That should be exciting. You feel free to take the easy answer and just say like they're all your babies and you love them all equally. Is there one sport you enjoy writing about more than others?
I mean, I still enjoy soccer more than the rest, I think. Partly because I think I understand it. Probably because I understand it more than most. Partly just because of like the diversity of it all. There's just so many different like cultures and avenues within soccer that I find really interesting in the way the whole world is kind of interconnected in various ways. So I don't know. I do enjoy, but I enjoy writing about basketball as well. And then, a lot of my job now, it doesn't matter what the sport is. You're just telling human stories and, interesting trend stories and stuff, not so much writing about games. So from that perspective, I don't really care what the sport is. But if I'm covering a beat, soccer is definitely still my preference.
All right. Well, I can't speak to your basketball or American football abilities. We did play against Henry in a pickup game in Chicago. Henry's real good. So there you go. You can take that at least when you're reading Henry's articles.
I appreciate that. And yeah, just a small shout out. Like obviously, like I won't be covering soccer, but like at Yahoo Sports, we've got plenty of like. Obviously, one of the reasons I was covering soccer this summer was because we had other resources dedicated to the Women's World Cup, and there was just a lot going on. So we'll still have plenty of soccer coverage, even if I won't be providing it.
Well, lovely. Well, when you are providing it again, we look forward to having you back on the show. But for now, Henry, thank you very much for being so generous with your time and for helping me make sense of my feelings about the U.S. men's national team. I very much appreciate it.
I appreciate you guys, and keep doing great stuff. As I said, everything throughout the past month was really remarkable, and all the work you guys put in.
And since he's not here, I'm assuming all of that praise goes to me, and none of it goes to Derek.
Yeah, of course.
Perfect.